Do you know how many times I was asked whether should I bring my son to the bedside or to the graveside? And my chronic response is, well, why wouldn't you though? And they would say, well, I don't want my child to be traumatized. And I would say, and why would they be traumatized? And they would say, Grandpa's all slobbering and delirious apparently and all the rest, and scary to look at, his teeth are out and everything. I say that's all true, but this doesn't add up to trauma. This adds up, for a child, this adds up to something very mysterious, and so far without explanation or precedent. That doesn't add up to trauma for a kid. It adds up to trauma for adults who are addicted to things that are familiar.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and this is part 2 of my conversation with Stephen Jenkinson, author of Die Wise. Stephen, you were talking about the sedation that is often given to people so that they're unresponsive, actually. And that's in the name of compassion.
Yeah.
What would happen otherwise if we didn't do that?
Sometimes you have to generalize to say anything. So these are generalizations, but let's work backwards from the last hours, okay? Generally speaking, people might be unresponsive even without the sedation, possibly in the last hours, depending on a host of variables. But as you back up from that last moment in time into the weeks before and the months before, what you get is a history of blunting and soothing and comforting and losing track of the realities of dying, by which you can reasonably know where in the arc of your days you are. That's called lost by another name. What I'm asking you to consider is that the extraordinary use of sedation at the end of a person's life is not a consequence of the fact that they're dying or that they're in their last days. It's a consequence of this lostness, you see. That's the iatrogenic dilemma that I was describing earlier. It's actually a consequence of the way we don't die while we're dying. And that's the best way to say it.
We don't die.
A death-phobic culture doesn't ignore dying, doesn't prohibit dying, not really. It's much more subtle and realistic than that. A death-phobic culture doesn't deny that there's such a thing as dying. It prescribes dying well. It has a prescription for, of course it does. If you were to ask 10 people on the street outside this room, what would a good death be? I can almost assure you that 8 of the attributes will be dictated by the death phobia. They won't be antidotes to the death phobia. They'll be attributes of the death phobia. Right? I'd like to die with my family around me. What about everybody else? What? There's one. I'd like to die, reasonably pain-free. That's going to cost, though. It's going to cost alertness and awareness. Why? Oh, geez. I'd like to die sort of with peace of mind. How are you going to achieve peace of mind in a death-phobic culture when your entire life has been lived more or less as if this moment would never happen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you've kindly held up this book, and it's mentioned its title a few times. Let me tell you what it's not called. It's not called, and this is how I've been introduced sometimes as the author of the book, Die Wisely. Now what's the difference? I could have called it Die Wisely if that's what I meant. If I had called it that, then the word wisely in the title refers to your manner of dying. And you might think that's what I'm advocating now, but I'm not. I called it Die Wise. In this case, the word wise does not refer to die, because death is not wise. So I say wise, I'm referring to you. By which I'm saying, I do not collaborate with the idea that no matter how you've lived before your dying time, no matter how obdurate or otherwise you've been vis-a-vis your dying, magically at the 11th hour and 59th minute, you can somehow miraculously pluck dying well out of the refusal to die that is characterized at least the culture you lived in your whole life. See, I'm saying you're very likely to die in the manner of your living. That's what I saw.
So gathering wisdom while you are living, or learning.
Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it?
Carry it on into your dying.
How about this? How about learning about dying without the, frankly, almost cowardly recourse of waiting till there's a terminal diagnosis to prompt you to that learning?
Yes. Yes.
There's a good example of, as you were asking me earlier, what might be done differently?
Yes.
The answer is living differently. Living, and this is not a good phrase in English because as if somehow suggested it's not really so.
Right.
But to live not as if you will die, but that your death is a companion to your life, not the annihilation of your life, not the condemnation of your life, but your life's companion, the truest companion you'll ever have. Anybody who says, I do to you, cannot keep the promise to you that your death can. Your death can look you right in the eye and say, I will not blink on you. I'll not have too much to drink and follow somebody else home. And it can keep that promise. And it does. You see? So dying, living your life informed by, yes, the fact that you're going to die, but it's not much of a fact. It's a bare bones thing as a fact. But as a sign of mercy, sure it is. They used to call pneumonia the old man's friend. That's what it was. That was the euphemism for it. Do you know why? Old is a fill-in term for probably at the end. Pneumonia is a very quick way to go, actually. It's a couple of days, 3 days, depending on how ravaged you already are. And yes, there's some sound effects, some gurgling and so on, because there's some lung involvement there. But it's pretty fast. And that's why it was called a friend. Now, pneumonia is treatable in the end of life. More often than not, it's still treated. You can't die of pneumonia. Well, what can you die of then? What are the causes of death that we actually serve instead of thwart? So then what does wisely look like? It looks like do everything you can.
Sure.
What does wise look like? It could look like saying, not what can we do about dying, but rather, what does dying ask of us, given where in their days this dying person is? What do we owe them, regardless of whether they ask for it or whether they don't? This is the deep dilemma, because if you go into the death trade as a customer satisfaction specialist, inadvertently, what you'll find you'll be doing is serving the death phobia that is appearing in the demands and the expectations and the hopes and the dreams of the dying person.
Yeah.
That's what you'll be serving.
Yeah.
You won't mean to, but you're going to have to choose between what the dying person wants for themselves and what dying is promising them. And more often than not, as a good mental health professional or medical practitioner, you will choose the person over the dying, and your allegiance will be to the person, not to the dying. If you read what I just said on a piece of paper, you'd say, of course!
That's right, yeah.
Of
Makes
course you
sense.
should.
Right.
And if you eliminate the
That's
last 40 minutes
human-centered.
of what I've said, it would seem the most compassionate thing to do is serve the person. But here's the caveat. This person, their way of living and dying, has been deeply informed by the realities of the death phobia that they were raised in. So of course you want to see it appear there. Now you realize what you're really serving. That by pretending to attend to dying people, you're attending the manifesto that a death-phobic culture writes for its dying people, which is the best death is the least death. Least death. Now, how do you achieve least death? And this is, your survey outside will include this. Okay, on your backswing, on the golf tee, that's the way I like to go out.
Just
Quick.
quick.
See?
Right.
Quick death is less death, isn't it?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Why? Because it happens fast? No. Here's the real foundation of least possible death in the death-phobic culture. The way you die the least is that you know the least about it.
Die ignorant then. Die not having to be...
Die not knowing you are.
Okay.
Die not being obliged to know that you're dying. Hence you get these discussions in the family room at the hospital. Should Dad be told? Dad shouldn't be told. Why shouldn't he be told? What good would it do to tell him? He's dying anyway. Why tell him? That's like, you're pregnant. What good would it do to tell you? Right? And then all these changes become inexplicable. And all this burden you're walking around with has no story, no purpose, no meaning attached to it. It's just affliction. And it's extra weight, and nothing fits, and you have no energy, and you're throwing up, but there's no story for it. And this is deemed to be compassionate? Anybody who did that to you would be sued for malpractice. But let's go deeper. If you yourself have lived in such a way that you cannot recognize, you haven't learned enough to know what the signs of your pregnancy are, we're really going to crucify a obstetrician for that? I don't think so. I think the deeper responsibility, frankly, is yours and mine.
Yes.
So you know the signs. You haven't been to medical school. You don't have to go to medical school. What behooves you, though, is to learn that as the inhabitant of this body, as the trustee of this body, you learn its ways. You certainly did that when you wanted to learn how to walk and talk and think and be able to run. And hopefully all of those things proceeded at great, for quite a long time. But then you begin hopefully to learn something like its limits, which is as responsible as learning how to run. And at some point, your obligation as its trustee is to learn its dying too. A death-phobic culture forbids that.
That's right.
As morbid, unnecessarily foreclosing on the other possibilities, and so on. Does this sound compassionate once you start saying it out loud? I think we'd agree that it's not. I think we'd agree that you're abandoning your post, Frankie. That we're in for the good days.
Yeah.
But you're not in for the rest of the story.
Yeah.
That you don't mind having a body as long as it's working. Well, what is that called? Well, it's a combination of cowardice and a deeply immature understanding of what it means to have been granted life.
Knowing that the body breaking down, dissolving, whatever words we are right, is just as natural as, is part of the bargain.
It's part of the deal. It's not very natural now. Natural should be, I think it should mean something in the architecture of the way it actually is. As I said earlier, we have messed with the idea that there's such a thing as your time to die so thoroughly that you can't actually recognize it when you're in it. It's all negotiable now. I'll give you a little vignette that tells you what this looks like. I'm teaching in ICU one time in a hospital. Most people are there with their, they got their suit on, but one guy's got his greens from the operating room on. And he said to me, I actually don't know why I'm here. I'm learning about dying. I said, why is that? He said, I operate the machine, whose name I forget now. I said, what's that? And he said, well, it was designed, very high-tech, designed to aid in transplant, so that when you're going through transplant, being hooked up to this, it breathes for you, it circulates your blood for you. What's the third one? Doesn't think for you, don't need that. Well, whatever the three functions, I'm blanking. He said, but we don't use it very much in transplant anymore. We use it in palliative care now.
A machine that keeps you
Bingo.
breathing, keeps your heart going, your blood circulating.
And your blood, quote, purified. Yes. Yes, this is there.
How can we learn about dying while we're living? How do in a practical way.
Yeah, everybody's death
companion.
before your own. That's as practical as it gets.
Being there, watching, observing,
Yeah, being there.
asking.
Being there from the time you're 6 or 7 months old, too. Do you know how many times I was asked whether should I bring my son to the bedside or to the graveside? And my chronic response is, well, why wouldn't you though? And they would say, well, I don't want my child to be traumatized. And I would say, and why would they be traumatized? And they would say, Grandpa's all slobbering and delirious apparently and all the rest, and scary to look at, his teeth are out and everything. I say that's all true, but this doesn't add up to trauma. This adds up, for a child, this adds up to something very mysterious and so far without explanation or precedent. That doesn't add up to trauma for a kid. It adds up to trauma for adults who are addicted to things that are familiar. So I'll tell you where the trauma comes from. The kid looks in the bed, then looks at you, then looks in the bed and watches how you behave, looks at Grandpa, who they now recognize because they've been up in the bed, as they often do. You haven't been up in the bed probably, but they have. And so they look at you one more time, and at some point they have to decide, because there's an event that's called in the trade cognitive dissonance. That means something's not adding up. I can see something, but this person's behaving as if they can't see it, but it's right there. Stiff upper lip, steady as she goes, whatever it is.
Right.
Which of the two is more trustworthy to a child? Eventually they're going to have to opt for the people who feed them.
That's right.
Not the reality they're learning, or trying to learn, or eventually are forbidden to learn in the bed. And that's where the trauma comes from that dissonance. And the gravesite, basically the same thing. So yeah, from a very early age, just not explanations, not diagrams. I mean, what are you going to explain about the realities of dying? How are you going to explain the mysteries? How are you going to explain where Grandpa is now, as if you know him? Okay?
Right.
All of those platitudes and pablum that go on at the graveside about, a better place and peace. Like anybody knows this, but nobody knows it. Okay? You might hope for it, so say that. You say to your kid, look, here's what we're counting on. But it seems to be a bit unknowable from here. So I can't reassure you about anything and look you in the eye. So we don't look them in the eye and we reassure them up, down, and sideways. How do you think this death phobia begins to make its purchase on people? By virtue of two things. Scanter, if that's a good adjective, experience or direct encounter with these things on the one side, and this terrible shell game that passes for consolation and comfort on the other. Because the only way you are going to comfort somebody who's dying, or the family of someone who's died, in a death-phobic culture, is to underplay the realities of what is happening or what has just happened.
So we call it, they passed over. We don't say die. We don't talk about
I lost my father last month.
Lost.
Lost. Which may be the singular most culpable post-mortem activity we could be engaged in. Losing someone who's died.
Yes.
Because when you say, I lost my father, you're not describing him at all. You're telling us what you did to him after he died. And if you think that's just a word, you look around in your life and wonder how many people have not lost the people they claim to have loved. I was just teaching in Bali. Bali's a real place. It's not that brochure stuff. It's a real place. And I can tell you, one of the realities of Bali is somewhat bigger than this book. They have a little platform outside there where they live, little compound. And this platform is a house. And now you know who it's for. Here, in a death-phobic culture where people are basically illiterate about the realities of dying, if I were to say something in the order of not losing your father and so on, more often than not people say to me, oh, I haven't lost my father. I said, oh, really? How'd you manage that? Well, I have him, or her, or whoever it is, in my heart.
Right.
Well, the Balinese, who are much more lucid on these matters, don't have dead people in their hearts, I'll tell you that. Because they understand the volatility and the dilemmas that ensue but they do house them, and they're not far away, and they can go to them, and they do every day, because somebody in that living compound's responsibility is to bring offerings of beauty and food, and they do that.
So
nobody you know does that. I'm willing to
So
wager.
the dead are kept alive in the memory, in the stories, fed?
Fed in every sense of the
Fed?
term,
Right.
maintained, sustained, in a sustainable way sustained. They're not sustained by people, tearing their clothes and cutting their skin, out of kind of, extravagance of sorrow. They're sustained by the manner in which the Balinese people themselves live. There's the key. By their manner of living, they also sustain their dead. By our manner of living, they are banished. And that's the difference. And that's why I call it die wise. In your manner of living, you learn your dying by learning the dying of all those who died before you, just for starters. Of course, learn the body also. Learn the basics of anatomy and respiration and all. Of course. Why be a stranger to it since you've been the beneficiary of it for so long? But this in and of itself doesn't guarantee anything. No? What you do more often is you call into deep disrepute that which is past for knowledge or compassion during the course of your life when it comes to dying. That's basic. That's why I called it a manifesto, because I am calling into disrepute that which passes for common wisdom. Because it's common doesn't make it wise. And I've tried to give you fuel in this talk for what is commonly thought and seen and decided upon and given up on and resorted to. Knowing this is a prerequisite for it being otherwise. And it doesn't help to have a living example either in your own town or somewhere in your life, or if all else fails, from a story from Bali that whispers to you, not all human beings are as afflicted this way as we are. And it is not part and parcel of dying to go out of your mind what you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the privilege of being with a friend dying who brought the wisdom from her life into it. She was still reading the spiritual books and meeting the spiritual people, but she had the music she wanted, she had the people with her, she had the minimum of pain management, that's it. Nothing to extend out that life. And
let me clarify something. I could be misunderstood here. I'm not talking about cold turkey here.
No,
I'm not talking about no pain management. I'm not talking about let the symptoms ride because that's natural. Nothing of the kind. In my turn, you better believe I'm going to at least hope that certain things are available to me, and hopefully with some discretion I can choose wisely. But who knows? What I'm talking about is why choose it. What I'm talking about is that the realities of dying are the guides to your choices. Not how do you not die while you do, and let that guide your choice. Okay? So there's no demonizing from my end of anything that's available in high-tech medicine. Nothing of the kind. That's way too easy, and that's more irresponsibility. It's learning. I'm talking about learning unto wisdom so that you serve dying instead of negotiate the relative defeat that you're almost certain that dying will visit upon you.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like a baby beginner at even glimpsing this, and that's how it starts. That's how learning starts. Thank you, and I hope that you die wise. At least you entertain some of the thoughts here from Stephen Jenkinson, author of Die Wise, a manifesto for sanity and soul. And I think there's a lot more to explore. Join us next time. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your support for Peak Moment. Come to peakmoment.tv.